There tends to be a lot of negativity around the term early access in the gaming community nowadays, as people tend to think it means a dev just wants money to make the game that they maybe want and maybe won't even make, while having people pay for a broken product up front. And while this can absolutely be true, we're kind of seeing more and more games start in an early access state and become absolutely incredible with time, and even launching in a really solid state. Now, we're going to preface all this because we're talking about No Rest for the Wicked, a game that is in early access right now, but has a lot going for it that is truly incredible. And need I remind you all that Baldur's Gate 3, a game that swept and is still sweeping literally every game award show it competes in, began as an early access title. So that, in addition to many other early access titles, goes to show that games can and do become truly incredible masterpieces by using early access to actually, work on the game. As of the writing of this video, No Rest for the Wicked has been out for a little over a week now, and has already received 6 hotfixes/patches that have improved performance, fixed a lot of bugs, and most importantly, adjusted and added things that players have provided through feedback, which is incredible in its own right. But also, just want to point out that 6 hotfixes in a week is almost as many as Starfield received in its first month of release. So take that as you will. Now, I'm saying all this up front to really back up the title of this video, that No Rest for the Wicked is a masterpiece in the making. Because yes, while it is in early access, I do believe that this game is already, right now, a near 8 out of 10 experience, and will only get truly better over time. And because of that, it will most likely become another example of early access working for the better. Because this game, even in early access, is already a functioning product that runs pretty solidly with the patches, isn't buggy, and is a truly creative and impressive new twist on existing genres, which is more than you can say about many AAA games as of late. So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, and let's talk about why No Rest for the Wicked is a masterpiece in the making. So before we get started, I do want to say, many of you might be coming from my most recent Cyberpunk video, which thank you all for support on that, but that was a heavily scripted, couple month long in the making video. This is not near as scripted, although I do have some scripted things I want to say, and then just kind of my general thoughts and takes on the game and why I genuinely do believe it's a masterpiece in the making. So while it may not be as high bar as the other one, I hope you do enjoy nonetheless. So with that said, I've kind of split this video into 2 different parts. The first part is going to be things I really like about the game, things that it has going for it really well, makes it super unique. And then the second part is going to be things that need to be fixed, are actually kind of currently trying to be fixed, and things I just don't personally love about that, to kind of give a full picture of what this game is so you can decide whether to invest in it or not. The first thing we have to discuss is the art direction and the world design here. Each frame of this world looks like a watercolor painting really come to life. The environments are incredibly dense and filled with detail on the level of something akin to Elden Ring, just in a different visual style. And this detail extends to both the cities and the harsh lands outside its walls. I knew that this game was going to be gorgeous from the studio's history with Ori, but I honestly wasn't prepared for just how impressive this was. I mean, the opening sequence alone had my jaw on the floor as you transition from the underbelly of this ship to the top deck in the middle of a raging storm. The lighting in particular throughout the game is absolutely stellar. And I'm not even playing on like an HDR or OLED display. And the trick here is that apparently none of this lighting is baked in, and it's all real time and reacts to you moving through the world, as well as a bit of a day-night cycle that really shows just how impressive this lighting technique is. The best instance of this I found is when you first arrive in the city, Sacrament, in the dead of night. The city streets are lit with torches, barely illuminating the shadows, and the moonlight overhead filling in the rest. After you settle down to sleep and wake up, however, it's morning, and Sacrament takes on a whole new light, literally. Where before the streets were dark and grimy, they're now basking in a beautiful sunlight, and you can see the trees blowing softly in the wind, with each leaf being illuminated by the rays of sun. And what really sells this visual style is the studio's change from more of a 2D Metroidvania setting to a 3D top-down format. But No Rest for the Wicked does something that is really interesting, and not many games have done this before, and I think Stardew Valley or a similar game has only done it, and there was a bit of inspiration for this. So it sort of curves the background elements in order to create a grander sense of scale. I don't have all the knowledge to go into this like super technical side of things here, so if you want to deep dive on that, Digital Foundry has an excellent video on it. But the bottom line is that this technique kind of curving and adjusting the way the backgrounds look does an incredible job at conveying the scale and wonder at work here in the game. The other side of this art direction is the world itself. And so far the story really seems interesting, although I have to admit, I'm a sucker for a good medieval fantasy setting, no matter how great the story is. But what is here is pretty intriguing. The main plot of the first few cutscenes deals with the new king trying to do what he thinks is best, being guided by a religious leader who, of course, seems evil. You know, very typical dark fantasy stuff, but interesting set against this plague that is transforming the people on the island, and you, of course, are one of the few that can save it. And because of that, your character isn't heavily involved, besides being this strong, chosen one who can defeat the enemies or whatever. But so far, I'm okay with that, as it's kind of a similar approach to how Souls games do their thing. And speaking of Souls games, we gotta talk about the combat. The combat is overall reminiscent of more Dark Souls 1 versus Dark Souls 3 or even Elden Ring, with a lot of commitment to attack animations and a slow, methodical combat approach versus Elden Ring's like really fast-paced combat most of the time. It's generally your typical Soul experience with like hard-hitting attacks and emphasis on dodging and parrying, but there are a few major differences here in design choices that are really unique to this game, I think, and I think I like them. They're just going to take some getting used to. Because unlike literally any other Souls or Souls-like, when you die here, No Rest for the Wicked, you don't lose your currency and enemies don't actually respawn. At least when you die, because respawning enemies is still a bit of a mechanic here, because over time and as you progress the story, the areas you previously cleared will kind of repopulate with stronger enemies in this like fog of war mechanic, as well as repopulating materials, which I'll come back to later. I like this in theory, but it also means that you can't really farm at all like in most Souls games if you're struggling with a boss or a certain area. If you're stuck, you're probably more than likely stuck until you beat it, unless there's some areas of the map you hadn't explored yet, which I will say I have found to be the case quite often, just because of the immense verticality of this map. On the other hand, this is a really cool mechanic because it allows you to kind of feel like you're progressing more in an area rather than having to slug through or just run past the same enemies again, so I'm honestly not sure which method I still prefer. Another thing to note right now is that the combat is really not designed for more than 1 or 2 enemies at a time, like really not. And I think it's probably mainly tied to the fact that everything you do takes a bit of stamina. Dodging, rolling, attacking, which isn't uncommon for this genre, but here it just feels like it's taking too much stamina for everything. Like there's not like some things take more. I mean, that is the case, but everything feels like it just takes too much stamina. Because parrying also takes a bit of your stamina, and it can just make fights feel pretty restrictive, especially when you're taking on more than 1 or 2 foes. So, okay, combat aside, what else do you do in the game? What is making this unique? Well, there is a huge emphasis on material gathering for both crafting, upgrading, and a little bit of a town management system reminiscent of Stardew Valley, which I know kind of sounds insane. A game that's like Elden Ring and also like Stardew Valley doesn't sound like it would work, but here I think it really does, even if some of these systems are a bit unbalanced at the moment. For example, the town upgrading system in particular feels like it takes way too many materials for each upgrade, at least more in the early game, as well as taking real in-game time to get those upgrades done. In concept though, I do really love this, as you can kind of build new work areas or just add decor to your little room or the town. And this is something the studio did do in the second Ori game, and it worked really well there, so I'm excited to see how it can improve here. Now onto a few rapid fire gripes that I personally have of the game at this point, and some of which are already being improved in patches only a little bit over a week from release, and some of which I hope will be changed in the future. So drops from enemies aren't really unique. The first boss I killed dropped a weapon that I already had gotten, so I would really love to see some unique weapon and armor drops. One of the biggest complaints with the game so far across the internet has been performance in terms of both frame stability and just general performance, and it still needs a little bit of work, but as of the most recent patch like 6, this actually is more stabilized overall, which we love to see. Imagine that, developers actually working on their game and improving things in a timely fashion. What a concept. Overall, it's drastically improved from launch day and will probably only receive a bit of tweaking here and there for lower end hardware. For reference, I'm on a 3060 Ti and a Ryzen 5 5600, and it runs pretty well at a solid 55-ish FPS at 1440p. It's definitely more of a CPU-bound game, I think, in some aspects, but running 1440p with a brand new title will put a GPU like mine through some work, as I'm quickly learning. What else? Let's see. The inventory fills up way too fast. That needs some tweaking, and it's been tweaked a little bit. A patch improved the stacking amount slightly, but not necessarily inventory space. So I'm really hoping that gets improved, because man, it fills up so fast because you're collecting so many resources, and the only way to add more slots is by killing certain main bosses, so it just will take a long time to do that. Another thing is there's currently no respecking, which is kind of a big deal in Souls-like games, unless you're Sekiro, which is like really the only exception, I believe. Most Souls-like games and Souls games obviously have respecking to kind of encourage different builds and allow better replayability, And this game just doesn't have that yet, and I'm assuming they really will add that pretty soon, because this is one of the most common complaints from players. And lastly, I think the respawning of enemies and the whole fog of war kind of mechanic needs a little bit of tuning, not necessarily for the enemies, but for the materials that respawn as well. Because as of right now, you need so many materials to upgrade the town, to craft things, to upgrade your gear, etc. You really need access to more materials than the game kind of provides you with on certain things. So I think that might be something they'll hopefully be tuning in the future, as this is also one of the more common complaints at the moment. With all of this said, good and bad, I just want you all to remember that this is still a fully functioning, fleshed out, and original video game that I think is absolutely worth the asking price of $35 to $40 for early access, because the team has already shown that they are extremely committed to continuing to update and listen to community feedback. So I come back to my thoughts at the beginning of this video. Is No Rest for the Wicked an early access scam, quote unquote? Absolutely not. But is it a game worth buying now or waiting for? And look, it depends on the person, but if you're a fan of how this world looks and its unique implementation of Souls combat and exploration, and you just like good video games, then yes, absolutely. What's available for you now is probably 15 to 20 hours, I think, of content, which is meant to be the first act or so of the game. So that's already a lot for the asking price. But if the hard combat is something you don't generally enjoy, or some of these other aspects and complaints that I have and other people have are turning you off, and you're not sure you'll have a good time, then of course you can wait. But this is definitely one to put on your wish list for the future if you're not getting it now. Because much like Baldur's Gate 3 and other early access titles before it, No Rest for the Wicked is such a great game right now, and will only get better with time, and you better believe I'll be there when it fully releases to what I am sure will be universal praise, as like I said, this is absolutely going to be a masterpiece in the making. Thanks for watching, drink some coffee and play some games, and have yourself a good one.